must be cautious.
Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Strap yourselves in, we're going to ludicrous speed. You're here with the Jedi Masters for another episode of Aggressive Negotiations as we continue our walk through Season 2 of the Bad Batch in preparation for the launch of Season 3. I am one of your hosts, Jedi Master John Mills, and joining me for this examination of the fourth episode of the second season, called Faster, is the esteemed Jedi Master and race aficionado, nay, inventor of the most obscure type of racing out there, comic book racing, which is a very odd one. I don't know how you get the books to actually slide, especially in the digital era, but perhaps you can illumine us just a little bit, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing.
Tech's gone plaid. Comic book racing is, especially in the digital age, it is to see how fast you can flip the digital pages and get to the end. So that's, and it, I mean, we're talking nanoseconds. We've had to find a way to track that on your devices so we can have winners. Now, whether or not you retained any of the comic doing that, I don't know. Probably not. I don't even think any speed readers could read that quickly. But it is turning into it's turning into the game of the millennium. People are really loving it. And so, we're going to get sponsors. We've got Nerf Nuggets sponsoring us, and Mantel Mix is next. We'll see where we go.
You know what? It's really exciting. It's an exciting time, and it's exciting because just like comic book racing, you can find this show on digital devices of every sort, and you can go ahead and leave us a star rating and review. We'd appreciate it. That'd be great over on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcatcher sort of thing you have going on. On Twitter, we are at the Jedi Masters, and the network is at Join Nerd Party, and just look for the Nerd Party on every social media network that is worth being on, and you'll find us. So here we are, fourth episode, Faster. And this is a decided departure from the tone of the last episode. Last episode, Solitary Clone, really dark, really heavy, a lot of thematic stuff that we're working through. But usually with a series, when you're having those sort of deep episodes happening, you have a situation where you can either continue to push forward and go further down the rabbit hole, or you decide to give the audience a breather and give them something a little lighter to ingest. Now, would you have preferred them to continue going down the rabbit hole that's opened with Solitary Clone, or did you consider this a welcome palate cleanser after something so deep and intense?
I mean, I think it's interesting that you asked that question, because I know a lot of friends that did not enjoy this episode. I think they wanted the more, dark and gritty take and the continuation of that we were, of course, getting with the Solitary Clone. I think what's fascinating about this episode is the way in which the undercurrent of it is quite dark. There's a lot of dark humor in this, like, somebody getting killed while watching a race. The fact that we continue down the trend of learning that characters that we've trusted, like Sid in the show, may not be trustworthy at all. And just how far they might go to use our characters that we do love to get out of situations that they have put themselves in. And so I think when I look at this episode, especially on the heels of the previous episode, yes, it has a lighter feel to it, yet at the same time, I think this is continuing the trend of this series, that there's a dark underbelly to it. Mm-hmm. And, I think a big part of that as well is that we're also getting a taste of the underworld itself. and the ways in which it seems like the underworld here are taking full advantage of the Republic being gone, the Jedi being gone, and running these, you definitely get to feel like this is a race, a type of racing that would not just exist anywhere. It seems much more dangerous than even pod racing. So yeah, I mean, we could do a whole show on the legalities of this type of racing, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I come down on it, and so I'm interested, especially watching it the first time, and now as we're doing our rewatch here. Do you feel like you wanted to continue to go down a little bit darker road, or do you feel like this is, the right tone being set here in this episode with where we are in the season too? I mean, it's episode 4 of the season.
My natural inclination is to keep pushing, keep going for that, it's something with a real weight to it, which sounds dismissive of other things, but it's not intended as such. It's sort of like, being old enough to have watched the run of the X-Files up until it was unwatchable. And everybody out there, even if you love the X-Files, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But watching that series up until you couldn't anymore, they followed the same sort of tactic. They would have these sort of bottle episodes where you might go 1, 2, or even 3 episodes with the quote-unquote mythology, the big alien conspiracy, all of this big stuff that connects back and forth. And then you would have an episode where they would give you a breath. And you'd initially come into it and you'd be like, no, I want to go back to the other. But then you understood they were actually being really good to you as an audience. You touched on a lot of stuff, though, between getting a hint about Sid being not just a comic character. I think in the first season, it's easy to regard Sid as just sort of, she's an underworld, silly foil for the heroes. In this, that final warning that's given to Tech and Wrecker and Omega carries real weight to it. And
yeah, it does.
I think in terms of the racing, what I love about this, about Riot Racing in particular, is with pod racing, with Riot Racing, these are all taking place in the more lawless parts of the galaxy. Mm-hmm. And you very much get the sense that Riot Racing and pod racing, they're variations on a theme, mm-hmm. obviously. But while pod racing is, very fast, very dangerous, that's sort of the one where it's like, some people might consider it a little underclass, but they're willing to, have it on their, it's like an F1 race. It's like, okay,
sure.
We can have that. We can host that, right? But Riot Racing is only going to happen in the really bad parts of town, sort of thing. It's sort of like the difference between Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift mm-hmm. and an official F1 race. They're both essentially the same thing, but there's spins on it.
It reminds me a little bit of the swoop racing that they did in the Knights of the Republic games. This is very similar to that race that you'd have, because it was in a lot of like enclosed spaces and like tunnels, and it was very similar to this. So I can definitely see the inspirations that they got from that game here, as well as, of course, playing around with the whole idea of pod racing and kind of taking it to another level and a different level. And so I thought that was one of the things that was interesting about this as well, because, if you have something like pod racing, there's got to be other types of racing out there.
I think that what would be an interesting arc in a book or something like that, here's another free idea I'm giving to Lucasfilm and by default Disney at this point. But I watch this episode, I rewatch it this time, and I think to myself, I would actually like a book or a comic or something that shows the encroaching weight of the Empire by having something like this happening on Coruscant and the Empire going in and shutting it down. This might be too far to the extreme in terms of, for some people's tastes, the idea of fun at any expense, so long as I chose to do it sort of thing. But it could really show how the Empire itself was shutting down any sense of liberty or fun all the way down to something like this. Like I could see a some sort of story about somebody who's a racer in this sort of circuit, and the races are getting more and more shut down. And we like start on Coruscant, we go to other places, and the idea being maybe that the Empire is taking all of these people that would normally be great pilots or pilots who could defeat them and finding some way to exploit or eliminate them. Sorry.
No.
That's a whole tangent. I just, I think you said it best. Like, it's not just pod racing. It's pod racing plus, and I think do you think that might be something that people had trouble plugging into? Like, do you think they would have gone along with it better if it was just pod racing, quote unquote?
I think that it's one of those things where I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that we're doing racing or any of those, things at all. I think it really does come down to just the question that you asked at the beginning, which, I think that a lot of people, and this happened with the Clone Wars as well, that the times where the show was really getting into its own mythology and everything, people really got into that. And then the episodes that seemed to be a little bit more carefree or fun or whatever, people seem to dislike. And again, I think one of the key parts of this episode too is we look at it in context of having seen the season. This episode helps us build the relationship between Omega and Tech and Wrecker without Hunter around, right? And so it continues to build her relationship with the other clones, so that, once we get to the end of the season and we have what happens there, right?
Yeah.
It's going to really mean something, especially to Omega. And so these are episodes to which, when you look back, you can see why they're important. And I think that that's one of the things is that, the Clone Wars did the same thing. They never wasted episodes for the most part. I would go to my deathbed saying that you didn't need 4 episodes of the droids in, purgatory. But, for the most part, they understand what they're doing with the stories here and why they're telling these stories. And there's enough important story points in this episode that make it important. But the other thing, you were asking for this idea of, okay, should we have a comic series or whatever where we kind of see the Empire coming in and shutting these type of things down? I think that this is a place on the other side where actually the Empire likes these things happening, right? It's almost the controlled chaos. It allows people the illusion of freedom, of being able to kind of cut loose. But at the same time, you just know that the Empire is using these type of underworld people and places for their own benefit. And so I think, to me, that's actually the story that would be fascinating to see, is the way in which Palpatine is actually using these black markets and these type of places for his own benefit.
I would then take both of those concepts and use it to illustrate how, as the governor's power grows, you can see how capricious rule is in the Empire and how onerous imperial rule is completely depends on where you're living.
Right. Great point.
So people who are living underneath a governor who's not the worst person, he just wants his money and a little bit of graft, and let's not be too hard on everybody. They're the ones that are like, why do you think the Empire is so bad? And then meanwhile, people are over where, like, the no fun guy is, and the guy that's taxing them to death and everything like that. And they're like, what are you talking about? This is the worst thing we've ever endured. And making it more capricious that way. But I like that we're spitballing this story, because I think what it speaks to is that there is an underpinning to this episode, even though many people, I think, regard it as a throwaway, that there's world building here, there's character building here, there's foreshadowing. When I watched the episode and they got the warning about Sid, my expectation is, well, Sid is then going to show that she she's learned to be sweet because of them, and she's going to be generous and kind in a way that benefits them. And it shows that people can change. And instead, they subvert my expectations, wink, wink, by having Sid basically, you'll have to bleep me here, be an asshole at the end of this, just like the guy warned. So that actually winds up, like you said on the rewatch, it's like, okay, this has real weight to it now. And like on my rewatch, I have a whole other layer I can come at it with and be like, oh, if only we'd listened.
Well, and I think, and I would say the beauty of that, right, is that, in many ways, we are so attuned in Star Wars to having that be the case. And I think what makes this great is the same reason I always argued that I thought Kylo Ren should stay evil, is because that subverts expectations. That changes the trajectory of where we all believe it to be going, right? And it also, I think, helps us to be able to see, Sid becomes, of course, a character who is truly out for herself. And she doesn't really care about anyone. And it'll be fascinating, of course, when we get there and we talk more about that. But again, this sets that up, right? Because every moment, especially the moment at the end of the episode where she's like, I guess I owe you one. And Tech says, I would say that you do. And she's like, I'll get you back. And she's so uncomfortable with owing anybody anything or being close to anyone because she really truly only cares about herself. She doesn't even care about her honor of owing people, really. The beautiful thing of these characters for her is she's been able to use them. And what's interesting is that in many ways, Sid is kind of a smaller version and a less nasty version of Palpatine. Mm-hmm. People are just there for them to be used. And, how you treat them is indicative of how much you can use them for, And so when we saw Palpatine being nice to Anakin and all those things, it was all for his own benefit. Right? He didn't really care about Anakin. We've talked about that before. And so I think in some ways that's kind of what we're getting with Sid as a character, which as this whole series really is about showing us the way that the Empire slowly creeps in and changes everything. I think that makes it a really interesting microcosm of the macrocosm of the rest of the galaxy.
Two things here. First, before I lose it completely, I want to acknowledge what you're talking about, where somebody in the stands gets shot and dies while watching the thing. That, to me, and I know how dumb this statement will sound, that is old school Star Wars humor to me. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that's got a real edge to it that will make me chuckle every time I watch it. Because to your point about the Empire creeping in, it's this sense of these people that are watching Riot Racing have always been, they're watching this gladiatorial, chariot racing sort of thing. It's the bread, it's the circuses part of bread and circuses for everybody. But it shows how somebody like Palpatine can take control because there are enough people where they're also in it for their own entertainment. Nobody cares this guy got shot. They just want to watch the race. And it's like, it shows how that's the sort of undercurrent that somebody like Palpatine can really manipulate. But additionally, I want to ask you a question because we're talking about Sid and everything. Wrecker, Tech, Omega. Does the future go differently from this point forward if Hunter had been there when the crime lord issues the warning? Is it simply the fact that it's Wrecker and Tech and Omega that there isn't the, lack of a better phrase, there isn't the adult in the room necessary to say, okay, everybody let's huddle. I think this guy's telling the truth right now. Whereas Tech, Wrecker is basically a kid. Omega is a kid. And Tech, he doesn't think in that way, sort of thing. Do you think it goes different if Hunter had been here?
I think that's a great question. And I think yes, because of course, Omega has been raised by these clones in some ways to help people when they need help, right? That's one of the things that the whole season is about, right? What are we going to do with the time we've been given? Do we just save ourselves or do we help save others, And Omega's really picked up that idea from these clones is that you help other people when they need help, She never spent time with Jedi, but she is exactly what they are, right? That she sees somebody in need and she does what she needs to do to make sure that she can help them if she can, right? And that's exactly what the selfless type of behavior that the Jedi were supposed to be known for, and the type of messages that George Lucas was very keen to pass on in Star Wars about the joy of the life of being selfless and the joylessness of being selfish. And I think you also see that nice juxtaposition between somebody like the clones and Sid. Sid is a solitary person, whereas they are a family. And what's interesting too, as we'll dive into the next episode next time, you see the same thing, I think, with Fee, right? Like instead of her being somebody who is a loner, she is willing to kind of work her way into the family of the clones, right? And so it's such an interesting way that they're building the season, right? And I think that it's one of the things that I've really come down to, especially in this era of television, that it's difficult for me to kind of judge just one episode at a time as the season is coming out, because it's only in retrospect that I think you can truly see what they're doing in each episode. And then I think you can rightly judge, okay, I could see how this episode could, kind of be, you could have some of these points shifted into other episodes and maybe this episode wasn't necessary, right? But I don't think that's the case with this one. I think this is one of those episodes that we get enough in and we get enough character growth and everything. And I think we get just a nice look at the, a different side of the universe here in this part of the galaxy that's worth going through this episode for. And so, I'm glad that it's one of those episodes that we got. And rewatching it, I had a really good time because as well, this episode is kind of a technological marvel, just with all the stuff they're doing with the racing and everything. That's, people don't realize, how it's not easy to build these things in the computer and make them look right. And this is another place where the lighting and the motion, the camera movements and everything is just the way that George Lucas would have filmed it. And he did in episode 1.
Yes. Final note before we go, a thumbs up or thumbs down on Teo, the Riot racing droid.
I felt like Teo was classic type of droid, and the idea of him, it's almost like he has the personalities of R2-D2 and C-3PO put together. Because I think R2-D2 always feels like a droid who's very sure of himself. And then C-3PO is just kind of like not knowing when to shut up. And you put those two things together, and I felt like you get Teo. I
like your read. I don't see R2 and 3PO put together per se, which is not to say that I don't see what you're saying. It makes sense. But I would love a Teo action figure because I actually really enjoyed him as a character, and I would like to have more of him somehow, but, alas, must not be. But maybe we could get Teo a Star Wars story as just like a cartoon short in Visions or something like that. I don't know. I'm just pitching ideas. I'm full of ideas this time. I'm full of other things too. But Matt, you are full of ways to contact you online. Where can people find you?
Yeah, all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02. Of course, you can find me here on the network with Outpost talking about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. Over on the TFM network doing the 602 Club, discussing all of the franchises that we love outside of Star Trek. You can also find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, The Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. And John, when people want see what you've got going on and maybe talk about their love of Teo and their desire for a Black Series figure, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me campaigning for that as Kessel Junkie Online, and you can find me here working in references to Teo from this moment forward on another show called House Lights that I co-host with Darren Moser and Tristan Riddell. So, with all of that said, I think it's time to go back and prepare our Riot Racers to go out and face the, I don't know, there are so many competitors out there, but none can really, we're shake and bake of the Riot Racing circuit. So I think it's time to close these negotiations.
Now you see me. Now you don't.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.